You don't belong here. That's all Caleb Hinton had to say. He didn't shout. He didn't sneer. He didn't even make eye contact. He just slid the boarding pass back across the counter, face down, and turned to his coworker with a smirk that said everything his words didn't. Julian Myles stood still, unmoved. Not out of confusion. Not from surprise. Just stillness, the kind of stillness that unsettles a man who knows he's made a mistake, even if he doesn't know how big yet. It was 6:14 a.m. inside the Orion Air First Class Terminal at Reagan National Airport. The smell of roasted espresso drifted across the lounge from a glass cafe. Leather chairs gleamed beneath golden lighting. The clink of champagne flutes mixed with soft jazz in the background. And just outside the frosted lounge glass, the storm was already gathering. Julian had walked in wearing a slate-gray tailored suit, Italian leather shoes, and a simple gold watch, nothing garish, just intentional. His posture was calm, upright, and precise. But none of that mattered. To Caleb, he was just another, overdressed guy trying too hard to look important. "Sorry, sir," Caleb had said with a slight shrug, "we're at capacity for elite entry today." Julian had already glanced behind the agent's shoulder. Empty seats. At least a dozen. No lines. No waiting list. And now, a lie served with a smile. "I understand," Julian replied softly. His voice was level, measured. Then he stepped aside without another word, walking toward a column near the window where he leaned with one hand in his pocket. Caleb laughed under his breath as a white man in his 20s approached the desk next, hoodie, cargo pants, earbuds around his neck. Caleb's entire demeanor changed. His posture relaxed, his smile widened. "Mr. Ryder. There you are. Come on in." "First class upgrade went through," Caleb said, tapping his access badge. "Enjoy the lounge, champagne's chilled." Julian turned slightly to observe. Then another young man came, then another. All white. All were welcomed in with a grin. None of them had the premium tier status that Julian's platinum-level membership granted him. But they passed through, no scan, no question. "You can't let just anyone in here," Caleb whispered to his colleague, unaware that Julian was well within earshot. "Gotta keep the atmosphere, you know." Julian didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. One thumbprint. One message. Same issue. Proceed as discussed. Sent. He slid the phone back into his pocket. His reflection in the lounge glass was still. Composed. But beneath that silence was a mind already 4 steps ahead. What no one in that terminal knew, not Caleb, not the smiling coworkers, not the half-awake passengers enjoying their free mimosas, was that Julian Myles wasn't just a frequent flyer. He was the quiet fire behind the curtain. The man who signed the board resolutions. The silent majority shareholder of Orion Air. And Caleb Hinton had just made the biggest mistake of his professional life. He judged a man by his skin tone, and dismissed an empire. Just outside Gate 5, Damien Knox set down his coffee and folded his newspaper once. A former military intelligence officer turned strategic advisor, Damien didn't need to be told twice. When his phone buzzed, he moved with quiet purpose. Inside the executive cafe, Wesley Grant clicked off his legal news feed. A Harvard-trained litigator with a background in corporate compliance warfare, he stood, adjusted his glasses, and calmly made his way to the elevators. And 3 terminals down, leaning against a cold steel pillar near the private baggage corridor, Tobias King pushed himself off the wall. Broad-shouldered, stone-eyed, and unreadable, Tobias adjusted the lanyard around his neck and began to walk slowly, deliberately, toward the lounge. Julian had built his team not for press releases, but for moments like this. Precision. Speed. Containment. No spectacle, just execution. Inside the lounge, Caleb was too busy joking with a coworker to notice. Seriously, he chuckled. The guy came in dressed like he owns the place. I mean, sure, nice suit, but bro, relax. Toby, the coworker, gave an awkward laugh. Even he wasn't sure if Caleb was pushing it too far. But Caleb had never seen consequences before. Why would today be any different? Julian glanced at the digital board. Flight 802 to Zurich, boarding in 29 minutes. Just enough time. His phone vibrated again. Damien is approaching the south entrance. Wesley is in the admin elevator. Tobias is scanning the perimeter. Julian's response was simple. Stand by. Let them play one more move. He needed Caleb to feel untouchable just a little longer. He needed the arrogance to settle in. That was how you exposed a system, not with fury, but with truth timed to precision. Just then, another white passenger approached. This one looked unsure, scuffed sneakers, worn jeans, holding his ticket with both hands like it might disappear. Caleb scanned him for a second. Then smiled. Hey, don't stress it, man. You're good. You don't have to look rich to belong here, he said with a laugh, waving him in without a second glance. Julian's jaw tightened. The only outward sign of what was already beginning to boil beneath his calm surface. It wasn't about the champagne. It wasn't about the lounge chairs or the warm towels. It was about the message. The assumption. The casual dismissal. The silent calculation of who deserves dignity. Gotta keep the lounge clean, right? Caleb joked louder this time, nodding toward the glass panel where Julian still stood. That was it. Julian reached back into his coat. The phone was already unlocked before his fingers touched the screen. Initiate. Sent. The first to move was Damien. By the time he reached the terminal side entrance, a low-profile agent had already handed him a sealed envelope. Inside, internal documentation, pre-cleared compliance access, and a full personnel file on Caleb Hinton. Wesley stepped into the operations level without resistance. He held an envelope labeled Urgent, Executive Review. Inside was a full brief on past misconduct complaints against Caleb, 5 of them, buried by previous managers, marked Resolved. Tobias didn't need paperwork. He walked into the lounge corridor like he belonged there, scanning exit routes, employee positioning, and sight lines. They didn't shout. They didn't show ID. They just moved. Inside, Caleb finally noticed Julian still standing outside the lounge glass. What's his deal, he muttered, sipping coffee again. Guy's still standing there like he owns the damn place. He didn't realize Julian did own the damn place. Or, at least, the majority share of the company is running it. And in exactly 9 minutes, that knowledge would reach him. But by then, it would be too late. Julian Myles didn't act with rage. He never had to. Rage was what people without power used to shake a wall. Julian built the wall. And if it needed to come down, he didn't raise his voice, he rewired the entire structure. His phone vibrated once more. Wesley has reached the compliance office. Internal systems accessed. Tobias flagged camera coverage. Logging evidence. Julian straightened his lapel. Then, finally, he smiled. But it wasn't the smile of a man who'd won. It was the smile of a man who had just begun. Caleb Hinton had no idea that the countdown had already begun. He was still behind the counter, sipping lukewarm coffee and chuckling to himself. From his point of view, he'd just fended off another, entitled guy with a platinum card and a chip on his shoulder. Maybe the man would leave a complaint. Maybe he'd call customer service and huff about injustice. So what? Caleb had seen it before. And it had never gone anywhere. But what Caleb didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined in his most paranoid dreams, was that the man he denied wasn't just a platinum member. He was a silent architect of the very company Caleb worked for. And the moment Julian Myles pressed initiate, the walls of protection around Caleb began to fracture. Across the terminal, Damian Knox moved like gravity didn't apply to him. Every step had weight. His military past had trained him not just to walk but to occupy space with intention. He was dressed business casual, gray slacks, navy blazer, no tie. Unremarkable. Invisible. Perfect. At the security checkpoint for Orion's administrative wing, Damian handed over a slim card. The officer scanned it, then straightened when the system flashed a blinking green message. Priority clearance granted, compliance enforcement. Executive flag. Right this way, sir, the officer said, stepping aside. No questions asked. In less than 2 minutes, Damian was inside a glass-paneled elevator rising toward the mezzanine offices of Orion's regional headquarters. He didn't need a map. He had memorized the layout weeks ago. At the same time, on level 4, Wesley Grant walked through a restricted corridor toward the internal audit division. He wasn't intercepted. No one stopped him. His badge read, Executive Council, Third-Party Ethics Review. It was real. So were the documents he carried. Behind his calm demeanor was a legal mind honed in boardrooms and battlefields, trained not just to read the fine print but to weaponize it. Wesley approached the compliance director's assistant and handed over a sealed envelope marked Urgent, Review of Staff Misconduct, Orion First Terminal Team. Director Vaughn needs to see this now, Wesley said. The assistant hesitated, eyebrows raised. Do you have an appointment? Wesley's voice was even. He'll want to make time. The envelope bore a red foil seal of the Executive Oversight Committee. The internal protocol required immediate attention. 2 minutes later, Preston Vaughn, the Director of Regional Operations, stood at his office window, scanning the first 3 pages of the file. His face paled. He sat down slowly. The report wasn't speculative. It was time-stamped surveillance footage from that morning, clear audio, clear video. Julian is being denied access despite full credentials. Then, a stream of white passengers with lower-tier access ushered in with smiles and jokes. Preston flipped to the second section, Employee History Records. Caleb Hinton. 5 formal complaints over the last year. 2 from the passengers, 3 from the internal staff. Everyone marked, reviewed, and resolved without action. All signed off by a now-retired manager named Denton Clark. A man known for sweeping things under the rug. Then came the bombshell, a memo from DC Holdings. It was short, direct, and terrifying. To Orion Executive Oversight. Subject, Emergency Review of Gate Operations, Executive Directive. Due to recent events captured and verified via Orion's internal systems, we are activating Executive Compliance Directive 4.7. This includes the immediate suspension of staff involved in misconduct, review of all related supervisory actions, and board-level audit of personnel oversight systems. Issued by DC Holdings, Silent Partner Group C. Preston Vaughn's mouth went dry. He knew that name. DC Holdings. Julian Myles. It clicked all at once. Julian wasn't just a name on a boarding pass. He was the man from the investment briefings. The quiet majority investor with strategic holdings in aerospace, logistics, and now, their airline. Preston reached for his phone, intending to call HR, but the screen lit up with another incoming alert. Executive meeting request, immediate. Host, DC Holdings Board Liaison. Subject, Incident Response, First Class Discrimination Scandal. Location, Conference Room B2. He didn't get to dial. The phone rang on its own. Mr. Vaughn, said a low voice on the line, calm and clipped, "You've been briefed, I assume?" "Yes," Preston replied, trying to steady his voice. "Just received the files. There's no delay. The directive is live. Please note that Mr. Myles is not requesting a conversation. He is issuing legal action by his rights as a majority stakeholder." "Understood," Preston said, stunned. "What's the scope of the review?" "Company-wide." Back inside the terminal, Tobias King entered the staff corridor adjacent to the lounge. He wasn't there to talk. His role was clarity through presence. He mapped the floor plan silently, noting lounge entry security points, employee break areas, surveillance blind spots, alternate exit paths. A janitor pushing a mop cart past him, nodding subtly. Tobias nodded back. The message had traveled. Quietly. Efficiently. Meanwhile, inside the lounge, Caleb was about to receive his first wake-up call. A sharply dressed man in a black suit walked straight up to the counter, carrying a sealed envelope. His name tag read, Noah Tate, Acting Supervisor. He didn't say, "Hello." He didn't smile. "This is for you," Noah said, handing over the envelope. Caleb looked confused. "Wait, what is this?" The man was already gone. Caleb opened the envelope and scanned the document inside. His name, Bradley Hinton. Underneath it, notice of suspension pending investigation. Caleb blinked. His stomach dropped. He looked up and noticed Julian standing by the pillar, still motionless, but now accompanied by a man in a dark gray suit, Noah Tate himself, who walked over, shook Julian's hand with quiet respect, and gestured toward the lounge entrance. "Mr. Myles, apologies for the earlier misunderstanding. Please, allow me to escort you inside." Julian didn't say a word. He offered a single nod and followed. Caleb stepped out from behind the desk, still holding the document. "Wait," he said, voice rising. "I need to speak with my manager. This is a mistake." Noah turned, calm and firm. "There's no mistake. I'm the acting lead this shift. And as of 10 minutes ago, you've been relieved of your duties." "Relieved?" Caleb stammered. "On what grounds?" Noah tilted his head slightly. "The documentation is in your hands. And if you read past the first paragraph, you'll see the supporting evidence includes surveillance footage and HR suppression records." Caleb looked around the room. Passengers had started to take notice. Whispers began. One man near the espresso bar muttered, "Isn't that the guy who turned someone away earlier?" Another added, "He just got replaced mid-shift. Something's going down." From the corner of the lounge, a businesswoman picked up her phone and recorded discreetly through her sunglasses. Caleb's hands trembled. At that moment, two men in navy blazers appeared beside him. Their lapels bore silver badges, Orion Compliance Division. "Mr. Hinton," one of them said, "we'll need you to come with us. Compliance review begins immediately." Caleb looked between them, stunned. "Is this for real?" They didn't answer. One gestured toward the staff hallway. Caleb obeyed. As he walked away, shoulders hunched, breath shallow, the last thing he saw before turning the corner was Julian accepting a flute of champagne from a lounge server. No words were exchanged. Just a momentary glance through the glass. There was no gloating. No smirk. Just a stillness more powerful than any outburst. It wasn't personal. It was structural. Back at Orion Air's regional command, Wesley Grant sat across from Preston Vaughn and laid out the next phase. "We're not interested in a suspension," Wesley said. "We're interested in identifying the rot. Every step of the suppression chain, who signed off, who ignored, who buried complaints." "And if I cooperate?" Preston asked nervously. "You'll still have to answer for what happened under your watch," Wesley replied. "But transparency may prevent this from reaching the Department of Labor." Preston nodded slowly. "You want everything?" "Everything," Wesley said. "Start with lounge supervisor records and Caleb Hinton's full incident history. Then we'll move to Denton Clark's legacy files." Outside, the airport continued to function as normal, gates announcing boarding, flights lifting into the sky, coffee brewing, passengers scrolling through Instagram. But within the system, deep in its structure, change had already started. Not through a press conference. Not through a public shaming. But through precision. Through power. Through preparation. Julian Myles wasn't waging war. He was correcting failure. And by the time anyone realized the boardroom was burning, the fire had already reached the foundation. The room wasn't designed to feel comfortable. It was quiet, not the kind of quiet you get in a spa or a first-class lounge, but the kind that made every second feel like it was dragging a heavy chain across the floor. There were no windows. Just fluorescent lights. A metal table. 3 chairs. And silence. Caleb Hinton sat alone, hunched forward, his fingers tapping lightly on the brushed aluminum surface. His Orion badge was gone. His phone had been confiscated. And his heart was doing a drum solo against his ribs. The door opened. 2 men walked in. Neither wore a uniform. No security badges. No nameplates. But their presence was final. The taller one wore a black shirt, sleeves rolled, revealing faded military tattoos along his forearm. The other was slighter, bespectacled, his suit tailored so sharply it looked like it could cut glass. They didn't sit immediately. They just looked at him. Then the bespectacled one pulled a manila folder from under his arm, placed it flat on the table, and finally spoke. "Caleb Hinton," he said, voice like cold steel sliding across marble. "Gate Operations Agent, Terminal 1, First Class Lounge." Caleb sat up straighter. "Can someone tell me what this is about? No one's told me anything." The man flipped the folder open, slowly. "You've had 5 complaints filed against you in the last 7 months, he said. 2 of the passengers. 3 internal." Caleb blinked. "Those were misunderstandings. They got reviewed. Nothing came of it." The man in the black shirt, who hadn't spoken, leaned forward. His stare was relentless. "Nothing came of them," he said, "because your former supervisor removed them from the review system." "What?" Caleb's voice cracked. "Every single one," the man continued. "Deleted manually. Marked as resolved without investigation. The compliance logs were altered. The timestamps say one thing, but the digital trail says another." The bespectacled one slid a printed sheet across the table. "We have metadata. Screenshots. Corresponding entries from the internal HR chat system." Caleb looked at the page. His name was there, attached to words he barely remembered saying. "Let's keep the lounge classy. You can't just let anyone in. We don't want it looking like a train station." The last one was the worst. It wasn't even something he had said to a passenger. It was something he had mumbled during a break, thinking no one was listening. The camera had been. He pushed the paper back. "This is crazy," he said. "Everyone talks like that. You think I'm the only one?" "No," the black shirt man replied. "We don't. Upstairs, in a boardroom with blackout glass and a silent projector screen, Wesley Grant was building a case, not just against Caleb, but against the structure that had allowed him to flourish. On the wall behind him, 5 names were listed. Caleb Hinton, gate agent. Denton Clark, former supervisor. Paula James, HR manager. Brent Langley, director of personnel. Nancy Brewer, executive liaison, terminal staffing. Each name had arrows. Complaint connections. Missed reviews. Suppressed incidents. This isn't an individual issue, Wesley said to the team of internal auditors and compliance officers seated around the table. This is procedural negligence rooted in cultural bias. And it wasn't just tolerated. It was protected. He clicked his remote. On the screen, surveillance from 4 different lounges over 2 years. Every clip had a pattern. Black passengers are being questioned more rigorously. White passengers waved through without a scan. Comments. Eye rolls. Quiet jokes behind the desk. This is what discrimination looks like when it's normalized, Wesley said. It's not loud. It's not violent. It's efficient. He paused. And it's time we dismantle it. Back in the interrogation room, Caleb was unraveling. I didn't mean anything by it, he said, his voice tighter now. That guy, Myles or whatever, he looked like he didn't belong. I mean, he wasn't rude, but, come on, he walked in like he owned the place. The bespectacled man tilted his head. He did. Caleb frowned. What? He owned the place, the man said calmly. Julian Myles is Orion's second largest stakeholder. He holds 22% through DC Holdings, and another 3% in preferred voting shares through an affiliate. That lounge? That plane? The seat you told him he wasn't qualified for. He designed the funding structure that paid for it. Caleb's face went blank. The man leaned forward slightly. You didn't see that, though. You saw a suit. A skin tone. And you made a call. He tapped the folder. But here's the real issue. It wasn't just a call. It was a pattern. A practiced, comfortable, systemic behavior that you knew no one would stop. The man in black stood. And that ends now. Elsewhere in the building, Julian Myles was seated in a private observation suite. No cameras. No press. Just glass and silence. His assistant, Reed Monroe, sat beside him, tablet in hand. Wesley's recommending a purge of all mid-level personnel who signed off on complaint suppressions, Reed said. He's also proposing retroactive audits of last year's terminations for bias-related patterns. Julian nodded once. Tell him to proceed. And Tobias? Julian looked up. Yes. He's just submitted his first sweep. 2 other gate agents at LAX and Houston were flagged. Similar behaviors. Same suppression path. Julian took the tablet. Scanned the profiles. Then set it down. This isn't just an airline problem, he said quietly. It's an industry behavior. We've built entire customer service structures on perception, not principle. Reed exhaled. We're going to get pushback. I expect it, Julian said. We're not firing for optics. We're redesigning from the root. He stood, walking to the wide glass that overlooked the main terminal. From here, he could see the lounge entrance. Passengers moved in and out, some laughing, some focused, all unaware that an entire reality was shifting behind those walls. They'll call this a witch hunt, he said. But the truth is, we're just cleaning the mirror. That afternoon, 3 internal memos hit inboxes across the Orion Air corporate tree. Memo 1, temporary suspension of regional HR operations pending review. Memo 2, Activation of Project Elevate, Internal Compliance Overhaul. Memo 3, Executive Order 4.7, Launch of Cultural Competency Audit in all U.S. Terminals. At JFK, 2 HR managers closed their laptops mid-conversation. In Dallas, a terminal supervisor who'd ignored 3 complaints last quarter called his lawyer. At LAX, a junior staffer who had been shouted at by a gate agent 6 months ago reread her email 3 times, then smiled. Something was happening. Not just change. Justice, with structure. By early evening, Caleb sat in a side office, hands trembling as he reread the summary document he'd just signed. I acknowledge that I am under formal review and that internal surveillance has confirmed discrepancies in my treatment of Orion passengers based on appearance. His voice had gone hoarse. The investigators had left the room. He thought of calling someone. A union rep, a friend. But his phone was still locked away in a drawer outside. For the first time in years, Caleb felt exposed. Not because of one mistake. But because he had believed, honestly believed, there would never be consequences. Meanwhile, Julian stood inside the conference room with Tobias and Wesley. Start pulling historical data from sister companies, Julian said. Catering, security, third-party check-in vendors. Anywhere the behavior could have migrated. Wesley nodded. We'll need full access. You'll get it, Julian replied. If anyone resists, refer them to DC Holdings Compliance. Tobias glanced up from his digital board. You think this is going to scare people? Julian's voice was quiet. No. I think it's going to make them listen. He tapped the glass. And next time someone sees a black man in a tailored suit walking toward first class, they won't ask if he belongs. They'll ask if they do. The boardroom at Orion Air's East Coast headquarters wasn't built for fear. Its marble floors, mahogany paneling, and panoramic views of the city skyline were designed to project stability, tradition, and control. The kind of control that gave executives the illusion they were untouchable. That illusion was starting to crack. It was 7:41 a.m. when Director Nancy Brewer slid into her leather seat in Conference Room Horizon A, her usual place 3 chairs down from the center. She smoothed her blazer and opened her tablet, already bracing for what the morning would bring. Across the table, Preston Vaughn hadn't touched his coffee. His fingers were interlocked in front of him, resting on a closed leather folio. He looked like a man waiting for a verdict. I assume everyone's seen the alert, said Brent Langley, the director of personnel. His voice, normally relaxed and clipped, was edged with tension. Project Elevate, Compliance Directive, Cross-Terminal Audits. Nancy interrupted. It's chaos. We've got staff in a panic, unions demanding briefings, and HR teams unsure if they're under review or part of the review. Wesley Grant stepped into the room before she could finish her sentence. No announcement. No knock. Just calm, sharp presence. He placed a tablet at the head of the table. Then he spoke. You won't need to speculate much longer. The screen lit up. A slideshow began with a headline. Orion Air First Class Conduct Audit, initiated by Executive Oversight Group C. The next slide. Complaints suppressed by HR over 12 months, 47. Number of unique employees affected, 31. Supervisors involved in suppression, 6. Terminated staff reinstated under review, 4. The room shifted. Not physically, but energetically, like someone had dropped the temperature by 10 degrees. Wesley stepped forward. I won't waste time. The incidents under investigation are no longer isolated to the incident with Mr. Myles. That was simply the ignition. What we've uncovered in the past 48 hours spans coast to coast. LAX, Atlanta, Chicago Midway, Logan, and here in DC. Langley raised a hand. This is a developing situation. I suggest we approach this in tiers. Stage the audits. Release internal memos gradually. We don't want mass panic. You're not listening, Wesley said evenly. This is already happening. The question isn't if. It's how you want to look when the dust settles. Nancy sat forward, arms crossed. We've weathered reputational storms before. Press gets distracted. This will pass. Wesley didn't blink. I wasn't sent by PR. I was sent by equity. He tapped the tablet once more. A new screen appeared. A paused video, security camera footage, time-stamped. Caleb Hinton, leaning over the counter, coffee in hand, laughing. Let's keep the lounge clean. The audio was crisp. Another tap. A second video, Paula James, the HR manager, on a recorded call last year. He doesn't escalate anything. He's just a little rough around the edges. Another tap. A third video, Langley himself, speaking at a manager's luncheon 6 months ago. We hire by instinct. Not every resume tells you how someone fits your culture. Langley froze. You don't remember saying that, Wesley said, but it's in our internal library. Training archives. You're the one who insisted all mid-tier supervisors undergo gut-based candidate filtering. He let that linger. Your gut, Wesley said, has cost people dignity. The silence was thicker now. Preston finally spoke, his voice hoarse. What do you want from us? Wesley's reply was instant. We want acknowledgement. Accountability. And alignment. If not, we already have board-level clearance to restructure this room. And trust me, none of you want to find out what that feels like from the outside. The room remained quiet. Then a sound broke the silence, a single chime from the room's wall intercom. A receptionist's voice came through the speaker. Mr. Langley, there's a courier at the front desk. He said it's urgent. It's from Mr. Myles. Langley stood, confused. Here. Yes, sir. Personally delivered. Langley exited the room. When he returned, he held a black envelope with a silver embossed seal. He opened it cautiously. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You ignored the warnings. This is the notification. You may resign by 6 p.m. and retain your executive benefits. Or you may stay and face a full investigation with no guarantee of protection. You have 4 hours. There was no signature. No letterhead. Just a faint watermark, DC Holdings, Oversight Class C. Langley dropped the paper onto the table like it was radioactive. He can't do this, he muttered. We're protected by policy. Policy doesn't override ownership, Wesley replied. And Mr. Myles isn't asking. Elsewhere, inside the HR compliance wing, a young analyst named Karina Soto watched the system begin to shift beneath her fingertips. For the past year, she had been logging flagged complaints, noting patterns. But her reports had disappeared into a black hole of pending supervisor review. Now, suddenly, every complaint she'd ever marked had been pulled up and reassigned to the Project Elevate team. She wasn't sure who had triggered the extraction. She only knew one thing. For the first time in her short career, her voice was being heard. And that scared her almost as much as it excited her. She watched as names were added to red lists. Names she'd reported. Names she'd been told to stop documenting. Then came a message from the new oversight system. You've been flagged as an early witness. Anonymity preserved. Thank you for speaking the truth. Her screen blinked. A file was downloaded. It was her own report, fully indexed, fully protected. And for the first time, fully acknowledged. She sat back in her chair, heart racing. Something big was happening. That afternoon, Julian Myles stepped into a private meeting room on the 40th floor of a corporate high-rise in Arlington. He wasn't alone. On the screen before him was the entire Orion board. No filters. No delays. Just faces, tight-lipped, some sweating, all watching. Julian didn't sit. He stood in front of the screen, arms folded behind him. "I've stayed quiet for a long time," he said. "And not because I didn't have the power to speak." He paused. "I stayed quiet because I wanted to see if anyone else would. If someone, anyone, in a position of leadership would recognize the slow infection in your corridors. The way disrespect was baked into uniforms. The way silence became your default language." He took one step closer. "But you didn't. You hid behind the process. You weaponized HR. You taught your frontliners that bias was instinct, and you punished the few who questioned it. And then you let it spread." The screen was still. Julian's voice never rose. "But I don't need to scream. I don't need to protest. I don't need to post on LinkedIn or draft open letters to the media. I built the system that pays your bonuses. I own the silence you once used to hide. And now I'm using it to dismantle everything you built wrong. You have 72 hours to resign offers if your name is tied to a suppression chain. If you do, we'll classify it as a structural adjustment. If you don't, we'll classify it as fraud through complicit negligence, and file accordingly." He turned away from the screen. And walked out. Not a single board member spoke. Later that night, inside a quiet media strategy room at Orion HQ, Reed Monroe finalized the talking points for the next day's press rollout. But he paused as Julian entered. "They're going to leak this," Reed said. "Somebody from the board. Maybe Langley." "I hope they do," Julian replied. "It'll prove our case for us." He walked to the wall, where 3 words had been written across a whiteboard. Equity. Dignity. Presence. Julian nodded at the words. Then added one more with a marker. Irreversibility. The sun hadn't yet risen over Washington, D.C., when the first email went out. Subject line. Restructuring notice, effective immediately. By the time most Orion Air employees poured their morning coffee, 5 executives had been removed from the internal system. Their keycards had been deactivated. Their emails are locked. Their names were scrubbed from department directories. No announcements. No goodbyes. Just silence. And in that silence, the entire company held its breath. At the top of the list, Brent Langley, Director of Personnel, 21 years with the company. He had arrived at his office as usual, only to find his access card blinking red. A uniformed compliance officer greeted him at the elevator. "Mr. Langley, we'll need you to turn over your badge and devices." Langley protested. "You can't do this without HR review." "This is the review," the officer replied flatly. Meanwhile, Paula James, the embattled HR manager who'd quietly suppressed Caleb Hinton's complaints, was escorted from the company's Dallas hub. Her supervisor didn't even look her in the eye. The compliance team already had the footage, the reports, and the digital traces. By 8 a.m., 3 more were gone, 2 mid-level hiring leads and 1 regional operations liaison. All of them had one thing in common: complaint suppression and internal manipulation of gate-level data. But the most unexpected removal came at 8:17 a.m. Nancy Brewer, Executive Liaison for Terminal Staffing. She hadn't even been warned. She was on a conference call with the internal policy team when her screen flickered and disconnected. A black box appeared. Session terminated by Executive Oversight Order 4.7. Two security personnel met her outside her office. One of them placed a folded letter in her hand. It was brief. Your authority is no longer recognized under the current compliance protocol. You are relieved of all duties, effective immediately. Nancy didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just stood there, her manicured hand trembling slightly as the paper fluttered against her fingers. The dominoes had started falling. And no one knew where it would end. Downstairs in the HR division, Karina Soto couldn't believe what she was seeing. The internal dashboard that had once been restricted to senior managers was now wide open, at least to her level. Every complaint she'd ever filed was now labeled. Reviewed, Elevate Audit Tier 1. Evidence filed, Compliance active. Witness status, protected. She sat at her desk in silence, unsure whether to smile or cry. The system that had ignored her for so long had suddenly turned into a megaphone. But that wasn't the strangest part. It was what happened next. At 9:04 a.m., her inbox pinged with a message from Tobias King. Subject, clarification needed, internal testimony. Karina, we've received a separate complaint that references your presence during an incident at Terminal 1's lounge last month. Would you be willing to meet in person? We believe your account could assist with pattern mapping. Time suggested, 10:30 a.m. today. Location secure. Thank you for your integrity. Karina blinked. Someone had named her. And for the first time, it was for the right reasons. She typed her reply quickly. Yes. I'll be there. At exactly 10:30 a.m., she entered a low-lit briefing room 2 floors beneath the main administrative wing. Tobias was already there, tall, unmoving, arms crossed behind his back like a monument. He didn't say much. Just gestured to the seat across from him and nodded. Tell me what you saw, he said. Karina took a breath. It was about 5 weeks ago, she began. I wasn't on duty, technically. I was shadowing Caleb Hinton for a role evaluation. I'd been asked to write a behavior summary. Tobias gave a single nod. Go on. Karina's voice didn't shake. It surprised her how steady she sounded. There was a passenger. Black, late 40s. Professional, well-dressed. Platinum card holder. Walked up with his wife, same credentials. Caleb looked them up and down, then told them the lounge was full. No scan. No check. Just a no. Tobias's eyes narrowed slightly. Then, Karina continued, 10 minutes later, 2 white passengers with silver tier access showed up. Caleb smiled, made small talk, and let them in without even verifying their tier status. I wrote it all down. But. She hesitated. But. I flagged the incident to Paula. Gave her the written notes. She told me I was being too literal, that lounge policies allow for soft discretion during crowding periods. I knew it was false. But I didn't know who to go to after that. Tobias tapped a small device beside him. Karina realized she had been recorded. Her words were now evidence. Would you be willing to write a formal affidavit? Tobias asked. Yes, Karina replied without pause. I want to be on record. Tobias leaned back, a hint of satisfaction behind his unreadable face. Then you're no longer just a witness, he said. You're a catalyst. Meanwhile, Julian Myles stood in a glass-walled strategy room with Wesley Grant and Damian Knox. The digital board in front of them displayed a sprawling chart of Orion's vendor partnerships. Third-party screening is next, Wesley said. We've already identified 2 contract firms responsible for gate security. Both have employee bias flags buried in arbitration records. Expose them, Julian said. Full contract review. We don't partner with silence. Damien nodded. I've also got patterns emerging in regional onboarding. LAX, Chicago, Miami, recruiters using word-of-mouth filters. Code phrases like culture fit to bypass compliance. Same old trick. Julian's jaw tightened. Rebuild the entire hiring funnel, he ordered. New rubric. New language. New leadership. Wesley raised an eyebrow. That's going to cause friction with corporate. I'm not here to win friends, Julian replied. I'm here to make sure no one like Caleb ever feels comfortable again. He turned away from the screen. Release the internal video, he added. Wesley blinked. Are you sure? The one from the lounge? Julian's voice was firm. Yes. Let the staff see what they've become. Let them decide which side they're on. By 3 p.m., the video was live on the Orion internal staff portal. No narration. No spin. Just real footage. Caleb denied Julian at the lounge entrance. Joking with coworkers. Welcoming less qualified white passengers without checks. A time-stamped counter at the corner of the screen shows each move in real time. Then, a fade to black. A single quote appeared. You don't fix what's broken by pretending it's not cracked. Project Elevate. Within the hour, over 8,000 Orion staff had viewed the video. Comments exploded. I've seen this happen at my hub. This explains why my sister's complaint got buried last year. I've been part of this. I want to change it. Whoever this Myles guy is, he's doing what no one else had the guts to do. At the same moment, in a dimly lit office in Atlanta, Charles Monroe, Julian's longtime assistant, answered a call from the head of a third-party staffing agency under Orion's contract. We're getting pressure from our legal team, the man said. They're afraid the audits will damage our rep, can we negotiate? Charles's reply was simple. We don't negotiate with cultures that let rot spread. Click. That evening, Julian stood in his private office overlooking the Potomac. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just watched the sky darken over the Capitol, city lights flickering on below. From up here, it looked peaceful. But he knew better. The storm was still moving. And in the basement of that storm, truth was no longer negotiable. He turned toward the table where Karina's affidavit now sat, signed and sealed. A fresh file was beside it, another whistleblower. Another thread. Another fracture. Julian picked up the report. Read the name at the top. And whispered to himself, not in anger, not in vengeance, but with the clarity of a man who'd already burned the old blueprint. One by one. Until the foundation is clean. The footage leaked at 7:12 a.m. Not through a news channel. Not through a blog. Through a private video sharing platform used by airline staff to exchange training clips and flight anecdotes. The file was named simply 1A_witnesses.mp4. Within 30 minutes, it had 80,000 views. By noon, it crossed 2 million. It wasn't just the lounge security footage anymore. This video had angles, multiple clips spliced together, showing Caleb denying Julian entrance, then laughing. A subtitle followed. He walked in like he owned the place. Then, a quick cut to Caleb being escorted out by Orion compliance staff. His face is stunned. Silent. Flanked by men in navy blazers with silver badges. Then came the final shot, Julian sitting in seat 1A, reclined slightly, reading a book with a glass of water beside him. The camera caught his reflection in the airplane window. Stoic. Still. No music. No narration. Just raw silence and gravity. The comments section lit up like wildfire. This feels like a movie. No way that guy's just a passenger. Is this who I think it is? Who's Julian Myles? The hashtag trended within the hour. Hashtag the man in 1A. By midday, every major business outlet had picked up the story. Some called him a mystery investor. Others labeled him a corporate avenger. A few tried to twist it, calling the purge reverse profiling or executive overreach. But the weight of the footage said otherwise. It wasn't about revenge. It was about rebuilding. Inside Orion's executive briefing room, the leadership team sat around a white glass table. Gone were the coffee cups and pastries of past meetings. Now, there were only laptops, legal pads, and quiet urgency. Julian stood at the head. "We've lost control of the narrative," said one communications director. "No," Julian corrected, "we've given it to the right people. The ones who lived it." He turned to Damien. "Status on training overhaul?" "Almost ready," Damien said. "We've dismantled the current onboarding system. New modules begin next Monday." Julian nodded. "Every department?" "Everyone. Gate. Crew. Call centers. Maintenance. If they wear the logo, they start over." A young director spoke up hesitantly. "That's going to freeze onboarding. We've got 2,000 positions pending." "Then they wait," Julian said. "We don't teach professionalism before we teach principle." Wesley added, "We've also begun unannounced terminal audits in 6 cities. Early signs show a shift, less discretion, more documentation. Word is spreading." Julian folded his arms. "An internal resistance?" "Minimal," Damien said. "They've seen the video. Silence isn't working anymore." Later that day, Julian entered the new Orion Cultural Competency Training Wing, a space that used to be a storage floor. Now it had been transformed into a center of reckoning. On the far wall, 3 words in bold lettering. Presence. Precision. Principle. Employees sat in rows, listening to a former Navy ethics officer explain the difference between bias and barrier. In another room, a behavioral analyst was using real customer service tapes to point out microaggressions. Julian watched quietly. Not from the front. From the back. He didn't want attention. He wanted transformation. Yet, as he stood in that quiet corner, something shifted. A scent. A sound. A memory. Suddenly, he was 19 years old again, wearing a suit 2 sizes too big, standing at the entrance of a private bank in Midtown Atlanta. The receptionist didn't look up when he walked in. Just waved vaguely. "You can wait by the window. Janitorial services go through the side entrance." He hadn't said a word that day. Just left. Silently. 2 years later, he bought controlling shares in the bank's parent firm under a different name. He'd never stepped foot in that building again. But the memory? It never left. That evening, as he returned to his private office, Charles Monroe was already there, holding a thick file. "Press requests," Charles said. "Everyone wants to talk. Forbes. CNN. Bloomberg. Even GQ. I'm not interested in being a mascot," Julian said. "I know," Charles replied. "But they're not going away. And there's another thing." He handed Julian a sealed envelope. Julian opened it. Inside was a single typed page. To Mr. Julian Myles. From Orion employee number 1192874. You don't know me, but I was there when you were turned away. I worked the food prep counter behind the lounge. I heard what Caleb said. I wanted to speak up. I didn't. And I'm sorry. But I've attached something. It's not just about him. It's about how they trained us. Every new hire got this document. It wasn't official. But it was passed around, wink-wink style. Unspoken rules. Line 4 reads, discretion should protect the brand. Avoid risky passengers. We all knew what that meant. And we all looked the other way. Not anymore. Not with you there. Thank you for what you're doing. Sincerely, LM. Attached was a scanned document. Julian read it once. Then again. Then leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. So that's how far the rot had spread. Unspoken. Unofficial. But everywhere. 2 hours later, he was in the Orion data center, seated with Charles and 3 behavioral analysts. Load the pattern matrix, Julian said. A large screen blinked to life. Dots. Timelines. Colored threads showing complaints, staff assignments, departure logs, customer status levels, and race, were voluntarily reported. It looked like a galaxy. But there was nothing cosmic about it. Every star was a person. Every orbit, a choice. We need to add a new filter, Julian said. What kind? Asked one analyst. Integrity under silence, Julian replied. Mark employees who didn't file complaints, but supported those who did. Find the quiet allies. The analyst frowned. That's hard to quantify. Start with the ones whose names appear in suppressed complaint footnotes. People who co-signed but weren't leads. Build from there. You want to reward them? No, Julian said softly. I want to lift them. That night, as Julian prepared to leave the building, he passed a hallway with recruits studying in silence. One of them, tall, young, unsure, looked up and nodded. Julian nodded back. Then paused. Walked over. First day? He asked. Yes, sir. Tell me something, Julian said. Why'd you take this job? The young man hesitated. Because I want to be part of something better. I don't want to watch anymore. Julian looked at him for a long moment. Then said, then don't wait to speak. And walked away. The hallway echoed with nothing but footsteps and fluorescent hum. But something else lingered too. Not fear. Not tension. Responsibility. By midnight, Julian sat alone in his apartment, overlooking the Potomac once more. His hands were steady, but his mind was loud. Charles had offered to schedule media appearances. Decline. Legal had offered to draft a public address. Delay. The board had offered to rename the compliance initiative in his honor. Refused. This wasn't about his name. This was about removing the comfort from discrimination, the kind that smiled while excluding, that nodded while diminishing. He reached into his drawer. Pulled out an old envelope. Inside, a single photograph, him, at 19, outside that Atlanta bank. Shoulders squared. Eyes hard. Mouth tight. He turned it over. The back was blank, except for a single word, written in his hand years ago. Wait. He picked up a pen. Crossed it out. And wrote a new word beneath it. Move. They didn't call it a strike. No signs. No emails. No official statement. Just silence. At exactly 8:05 a.m., the regional operations leads from 7 major U.S. airports didn't log in. Their schedules had been cleared. Their meetings have been canceled. No replacement notifications were sent to central staffing. For an airline of Orion's scale, it was a subtle but unmistakable. In 45 minutes. Terminal 3 at O'Hare reported a disruption in gate processing. Logan's early crew clearance team failed to release boarding groups on time. Atlanta's maintenance supervisor sent vague, under review, flags for non-existent safety checks. In Dallas, a senior manager claimed his account had technical issues and left for the day. To outsiders, it looked like random noise. But Julian knew better. At 9:20 a.m., he sat with Charles and Wesley in the crisis room. The board was alive with dots and reports flashing yellow. "They're stalling us," Wesley muttered. Not openly. Just dragging their feet. Julian leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "They're not resisting the change," he said. "They're trying to outlast it." Charles scrolled through a feed of internal comms. "They think if they wait long enough, we'll shift our focus. Or be forced to compromise." "They're wrong," Julian said. He turned to Wesley. "Have legal prep a staff-wide memo. Full transparency. Not legalese, just facts. I'll sign it myself." "Content?" Wesley asked. Julian's voice was firm. "Let them know we see them. And let the rest of the staff know this isn't about power. It's about persistence." Charles hesitated. "You want to call them out publicly? Won't that escalate it?" Julian turned his gaze to the glass wall beyond, where the city stretched beneath a pale sky. "They started this quietly," he said. "Let's finish it loudly." By 10:45 a.m., the memo hit every inbox in the Orion Air system. Subject, from the desk of Julian Myles, "Truth, not threats. To all Orion personnel. In the last 72 hours, we've taken necessary steps to confront patterns that have festered under the surface of this company for too long. The intention is not to punish, but to protect what we are becoming. We've noticed unusual disruptions across regional hubs. If those are due to discomfort with change, we welcome dialogue. If they are coordinated acts of delay, understand this, silence is not a shield anymore. We are not changing direction. We are reinforcing it. You don't get to opt out of integrity. Respectfully. Julian Myles. Principal Stakeholder, DC Holdings Executive Oversight, Orion Air. It was the shortest executive memo in company history. And the most shared. Within hours, internal Slack threads lit up. He sees us. Finally, someone's not afraid to lead. This is bigger than airline policy. This is a culture shift. But not everyone celebrated. That afternoon, a private message appeared on Charles's secured tablet. Encrypted. Anonymous. But unmistakably precise. The problem isn't your message. It's your pace. Even truth needs traction. You've pulled the roots too fast. DT. Charles raised an eyebrow. You know who that is? Julian nodded. Slowly. Damien Tate, he said. Wesley looked up. I thought he was out of the picture. He sold his last equity firm 5 years ago. He didn't sell, Julian said. He shifted. Charles leaned in. What's his angle? Julian stood, walked to the window, and spoke with the kind of quiet that suggested long history. Tate's not just another corporate ghost. He helped me build my second company. He was the first one to tell me I was wasting time trying to change how people saw me. That I should just beat them at their own game. And did you? Julian's jaw tightened. I left. He stayed. At 1:30 p.m., a story broke on a fringe business site, seeded through back channels. Anonymous insider, Orion reforms are causing operational collapse. It wasn't picked up immediately by the big players. But the phrasing was sharp. Sources inside Orion Air report confusion, morale issues, and arbitrary terminations cloaked as reform. Leadership appears unresponsive to natural staff fatigue. Internal sources suggest external investors may intervene. It was subtle sabotage. And classic Tate. Julian scanned the article. No proof. No names. Just whispers. Just enough to nudge the narrative. Wesley shook his head. If we don't respond, this becomes the new truth. We won't, Julian said. We'll let the staff respond. He opened his internal dashboard. A new testimonial video had just been uploaded. It was Karina, the whistleblower from HR. She stood in front of a plain white wall. No script. No edits. Just a message. I watched this happen for years. I filed complaints. No one listened. Then I watched a man get denied access not because of his status, but because of his skin. And this time, something changed. Someone listened. I've seen Julian Myles' name on board memos before. But I never thought he'd show up. And I didn't think he'd stay. But he did. He's still here. And that's why I'm still here. Charles smiled faintly. You think she knows how powerful that is? Julian replied, she doesn't need to. The truth always finds its voice. That evening, Julian received a call. Not a scheduled one. Not through official lines. A personal number. One of only a few people had. He answered. You're moving too fast, came the voice. Calm. Polished. Tate. You're still using shadows, Julian replied. A pause. I'm not your enemy, Tate said. No, Julian agreed. You're just afraid I might win without becoming like you. Another pause. You'll lose control, Tate warned. People like us don't lead revolutions. We finance them. But you're trying to do both. That's dangerous. Julian walked to the window. The system made people think dignity had a price. It doesn't. And that scares you. You think people will follow principle over protection? Julian's reply was simple. They already are. Then he ended the call. As midnight approached, Julian met with Damien and Wesley in the quiet upper-level project room. Let them try, Julian said. Leaks, strikes, whispers. We won't move faster or slower because of it. Wesley nodded. We're winning hearts. Damien added, and they're running out of places to hide. Julian turned toward the whiteboard. The phrase, Project Elevate, was now written beneath a newer one, just added. Phase 2, Endurance. He looked at his team. No more reaction. We go on offense. Not to punish, but to reinforce. Let every employee know this isn't a phase. It's a standard. And the region's stalling? Charles asked. Julian's gaze sharpened. We rebuild them, too. Piece by piece. It began, as so many revolutions do, not with thunder, but with a whisper. At precisely 6:03 a.m., the new Orion Air campaign launched across every terminal screen, in-flight entertainment system, and social platform. There were no celebrities. No voiceovers. No music swells. Just an empty seat. Seat 1A. A slow pan in warm light. Crisp fabric. A glass of still water. A folded newspaper. And the faint silhouette of a man's reflection in the window, still, calm, waiting. Then, a phrase faded onto the screen. Dignity doesn't ask for permission. In the next frame, text appeared. A system denied him. He changed the system. Orion Air. Rebuilt from within. The campaign ran just 90 seconds. But in that minute and a half, an entire industry fell silent. By mid-morning, Julian Myles was sitting in that very seat, 1A, aboard Flight 906 to Seattle. The aircraft hummed quietly as boarding continued. Outside the tinted window, dawn was just breaking, streaks of pink and gold cutting across the sky like fresh paint. He hadn't planned to fly that morning. But something in him said it needed to be this flight. This seat. This moment. As the final passenger settled in, a young black woman paused near his row. She was wearing a Navy Orion uniform, ground crew, likely. But her lanyard read leadership trainee. Her eyes widened when she realized who he was. "I just wanted to say," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "what you did, what you're doing, it made me apply. I never thought I belonged here. Not really. Not until I saw you, sitting here, not flinching." Julian looked up at her, his expression soft. "You always belonged," he said gently. "They just didn't see you yet." She nodded quickly, tears forming. "Thank you, Mr. Myles." He offered a small smile. "Call me Julian." As she moved back down the aisle, the attendant approached and bent slightly toward him. "Would you like anything before takeoff, Mr. Myles?" He considered it. "Just water," he replied. Still. Thousands of feet below, inside Orion's Atlanta headquarters, the final phase of Project Elevate was underway. The last of the legacy executives had quietly stepped down that week, accepting voluntary severance with non-disclosure clauses waived, a key requirement from Julian's team. No one would leave hidden. Their roles would be filled not through back channels, but through a new blind evaluation program designed by a multiracial, cross-gender ethics panel. For the first time in Orion's history, lived experience counted as leadership currency. In a training room on the 6th floor, Karina Soto stood before a new cohort of hires. She wore a simple black blouse, no title badge, just her name. The screen behind her read, "Redefining professionalism, speaking without fear." She looked at the room full of nervous eyes and said simply, "I used to think loyalty meant silence. But now I know loyalty means honesty. Even when it's uncomfortable." The room didn't applaud. They just nodded. Felt it. Believed it. In another corner of the building, Charles Monroe watched internal morale data climb steadily. His assistant leaned over. "Press wants to call this a corporate reckoning," she said. "What should we call it?" Charles smiled faintly. "Call it clarity." Just then, an unexpected message appeared in Charles's inbox. From DT. Subject: I was wrong. You didn't just outlast the system. You rewired it. If you ever need capital for the next one, I'm in. No strings. Tate. Charles forwarded it to Julian with a single line. The devil finally blinked. Back on the flight, cruising at 33,000 feet, Julian Myles closed his laptop. The window beside him was filled with sunlight now. Below, the world looked small. Manageable. Like maybe just maybe just maybe, it could be remade. He took out a folder from his leather bag. Inside, the final report from Project Elevate. Across the top, bold silver letters read, Integrity Report, 90-day Transformation Audit. 128 personnel replaced. 342 complaints reopened and resolved. 300 employees retrained. 1 anonymous reporting system launched. 17 former whistleblowers promoted. 6 new ethics councils formed. 1 culture shifted. But the most important line was buried halfway through, in small font. Incidents of discriminatory discretion, reduced by 84% in 90 days. Julian stared at that number. Not perfect. But proof. It wasn't just theory anymore. It was measurable. Real. Contagious. A soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Mr. Myles." It was the captain. Julian looked up, surprised. The man extended his hand. Not with fanfare. Just sincerity. "I've been flying for 27 years, he said. "And I've never seen a policy do what you've done. You didn't just fix a problem. You changed how we look at each other." Julian stood, shook his hand. "I didn't do it alone." The captain smiled. "That's why it worked." He nodded once and returned to the cockpit. Julian sat back down. Reclined. And for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself stillness. Not as armor. Not as a strategy. But as peace. That evening, after landing, Julian returned to the modest brownstone where he kept his private residence. No valet. No guards. Just the familiar creak of old wood floors and the distant hum of city life through slightly cracked windows. He poured himself a glass of tea. Sat on the balcony. Watched the sun descend behind buildings whose shadows didn't scare him anymore. Charles called once. He ignored it. Then his phone buzzed again. This time, a message. From Karina. "We're teaching them to stand. But also to see." Julian stared at the words. Then typed his reply. "Good. Because the seat only matters if the view is clear." In a media interview 1 year later, when asked why he never gave a press conference during the reform, Julian Myles simply said, "The loudest things I've ever done were in silence." He paused. Then added, "Change doesn't need a podium. It needs follow-through." The reporter blinked. "Is there anything you regret?" Julian looked past her. Then smiled, gently. "Waiting so long. What if changing the world didn't require noise, just courage?" Julian Myles taught us something we often forget: real power doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from standing still when the world tries to erase you, and choosing to build, not destroy. This story reminds us that dignity is not granted, it's owned. And when systems fail to recognize it, true leaders don't walk away, they quietly stay, quietly correct, and quietly elevate everyone around them. In our own lives, we face doors that won't open, rooms where we're not welcomed, and judgments based on how we look or where we come from. But like Julian, we can choose not to internalize rejection. We can choose to move with precision, with principle, and with presence. Change isn't always loud. Sometimes it starts with a decision: I won't wait to be seen. I will stand until they see. Let this story be a mirror and a map. A mirror for the biases we've overlooked, and a map for the courage we can activate, in boardrooms, classrooms, and every place in between. If this story moved you, share it. If it reminded you of your worth, like it. And if you believe the world needs more quiet revolutions led by people like you, subscribe. Because change doesn't need a crowd. It just needs someone willing to sit in seat 1A and stay.